Welcome to AFibulous Life, Unlimited Conversation, the podcast where we explore what it really means to live, adapt, and thrive with atrial fibrillation. Hosted by Jim Kaveney, this is a space for real stories, expert insights, and honest conversations about heart health, resilience, and life beyond diagnosis, because AFib doesn't define you. And with the right support, your life can still be unlimited.
Okay, so what if patients weren't just subjects in a clinical trial, but they were actually scientists, maybe even collaborators and architects of what gets studied in the first place? As you guys know, I have AFib. I still think about AFib all the time, even though I'm not actively in AFib. But I've learned that one of the most powerful things that can happen for an AFib patient is the moment they realize that their experience is data and their voice is actually evidence. And their story actually matters to science. And I think my story matters to science today. And so today's guests, I'm so excited to introduce. They are going about doing this exactly what I just said from the Netherlands, where they've built one of the most innovative patient-centered AFib research platforms in the world. Welcome to the AFibulous Life. This is the Unlimited Conversation. And what if the most important AFib researchers in the world, as I said, were just the patients? They were co-creating research with the researchers, right? Today, I have not one, but two extraordinary guests joining me from the Netherlands. Together, they co-founded the AFIP Foundation, and that is the Atrial Fibrillation Innovation Platform. This is one of the most remarkable examples of patients and researchers actually working together to change what we know about this condition. We have soon-to-be Dr. Myrthe Kuipers, and we also have, she's a researcher, co-founder, and the force who connects the patient community to the science. And then we have Dr. Bianca Brundel, who is a full professor of physiology at Amsterdam UMC. She's also a leading AFib scientist and someone who has dedicated her career to understanding what actually happens in the heart during AFib and how to stop it. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Jim, for having us.
How'd I do? Did I capture all the essence of your expertise?
Yes.
Should you also mention that we are mother and daughter?
Oh, yes, mother-daughter duo.
Yeah.
The mother-daughter duo. I love it.
As well.
It is, and you know, and I have to state, you know, I met you two live 2 years ago in a conference, right? And I was so impressed because I was sitting at the conference and I saw you were one of the last sessions of the whole conference, and I just was enamored with what you were doing and how you're going about things. And so I remember I ran up to you and said, hey, this is what I want to try to do for AFib patients. And you know, since 2 years ago, we've built our friendship and relationship, and I love the collaboration that we're doing, and I hope we can do more. But what I want to do today is really give you the platform today to kind of talk about what it is you're doing overseas, how we can translate that to the United States, and take it from there. So as I mentioned, we're going to do a little ping pong match with some questions. So Myrthe, we're going to start with you. So before we get into the science, you know, give us a little bit of that human story. How did somebody with a background in marketing end up co-founding the AFib Foundation?
Yeah, actually, a great question. I get that a lot. So yeah, I have a background in marketing. I always studied business administration. And actually 10 years ago, or even 11 years ago, Bianca and I, we were walking in the evening. She was talking about her work. I always thought I would never do something in the healthcare. But she was always describing like how patients with atrial fibrillation would actually reach out to her with questions like, hey, when is there like new research coming up? Because I had an ablation, but I still have atrial fibrillation today. What else can I do? Sure. So I told Bianca back in the day, like, oh, you know what? It would actually be kind of cool if, you know, there would be like a platform where you could communicate about your research that you're doing. And we also see if we can collaborate with people in new studies. And that actually sparked the idea to develop the Atrial Fibrillation Innovation Platform, AFib. And we did this together also with Natasha de Groot. She is cardiologist at Erasmus Medical Center. And together we kind of joined forces to build the platform. And soon we realized that actually people had so much, you know, insights into what was triggering their atrial fibrillation, what symptoms they had. So it actually, it was a natural path for us to mention like, hey, we should do something with these insights and, set up new studies based on what people are saying. So that's
great.
basically how I rolled into it. And with my marketing knowledge, back in the day, I was doing search engine optimization. So I was really trying to see what what people were Googling and what questions people had so that we could provide content to answer these questions. So that's basically how it all started for us.
That's amazing. Because I know, and I could say from my own personal experience, like when I was first diagnosed, back in 2012, that's the first thing I did was I went online to try to find out what is going on with me, what is out there from my perspective, and and we'll get into this a little bit, down the road in these questions, but there was that feeling of alone, right? Even I know there's millions of AFib patients, like I never felt like there was a true place to go and share my feelings, my thoughts. What am I going through? Am I unique? Am I different? Those types of things. And so I really appreciate that definition that you just came up with, how you form this together, and the fact that your mother-daughter combination still is amazing, because you spend so much time together too, right? And so
Absolutely.
do you guys always talk about AFib? Or you?
Most of the time, like, to be honest, usually when we are seeing other family members, they're always like, no AFib, no my AFib, no, don't talk about it. So we do talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
And I like what you mentioned, Jim, because actually a lot of the people on our platform mention the same thing. Like, wow, I actually never thought that others were experiencing the same thing as I am experiencing right now with AFib. So it's really nice to see that people find a place where they're heard, because a lot of times when people see their cardiologist, they don't really have that time to really, share their story, because cardiologists are also busy people. So we hear that a lot as well. Yeah.
And just a quick follow-up to that, because I know in the U.S. healthcare system is much different than what happens in Europe. Um, is the time there, even with the cardiologist in Europe, for them to sit down and have a few minutes to understand what's truly going on with the patient? Or is it very much like the United States is like, well, no, you got 15 minutes and we're going to move you on to the next thing?
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Exactly
It's
the
also
same.
like 10 to 15 minutes. Yes.
Okay. Well, I know you're working hard to change that, and I think all of us, and our shared friend Melanie True Hills is doing such a robust job too in providing the education in the community there. So Bianca, let's shift to you a little bit. So from your side, what made you decide, that research couldn't just happen in the lab?
That is because people with AFib, they reached out to me. Like over 10 years ago, I started to receive more and more emails from people suffering from AFib. Because back then, we published a paper in Circulation describing a new druggable target that may help to treat AFib. That was an HDAC6 inhibitor that may help in AFib. And that got a lot of attention in the Netherlands. We reached the mainstream news outlets, and we got a lot of attention. So people started to email me like, you tested a new compound against AFib, the HDAC6 inhibitor. Can I be part of your clinical trial? And then I thought like, wow, there are so many people in need for a new treatment for their AFib. And that is what I discussed with Myrthe. And Myrthe mentioned, like, if there are so many people out there looking forward to be part of a clinical trial, for example, maybe you should start a platform. And back then, we were not so much still involved in co-creation. Our initial idea was we communicate our findings with people with atrial fibrillation. And we also opened a forum, and people started to talk about their AFib and their experiences. And when we read the content of these people, we realized that it is very rich, and also the content can help us to create new hypotheses for experiments in a lab or also clinical trials. So so it started as a platform for improving communication between stakeholders, so between patients and health professionals. It soon already became a platform for co-creation. And later on, we introduced citizen science component to the platform. Yeah. So we actively ask people more insights on certain topics. People provide information, and based on the information, we set up new preclinical trials, so experiments in the lab, to get more insights in how does a trigger work in a lab, for example, in our model systems. And we also try to identify interesting ways to treat patients. And therefore, we also introduce clinical trials in patients in the hospital in Amsterdam.
Wow, that's amazing. So it seems like it was the patients that were kind of screaming up to say, hey, no, let me really dive into this. So they were being the co-creators really from the very beginning, right? And you guys, and I think probably the most important thing from a physician's and a researcher's perspective is you actually listened, right? So oftentimes, that doesn't happen, right? And so I think that's so important.
We got some really interesting new ideas, new angles in research that help us to get more and better insights in how AFib works in the heart. What is happening exactly in the atrial cardiomyocytes, and how can this affect the function of the atrial cardiomyocytes? It gives a unique angle to the research.
Yeah.
And if I may add to that, I actually also have the feeling that it was not just the patients, but it was also actually you with the research team that was, you had some really nice findings, and you also needed new investments to bring these findings further. And because the industry the research is so industry driven and based on technology, you also wanted to get people to know that there's other solutions that are being developed and that it takes time. So there was also, I think, coming from you, a motive to actually, share what else is happening in the field, and that actually with potential retargeting of drugs, we could actually get new solutions. And I think that's what really motivated people as well to help us, share their experiences and also donate to new studies.
Yeah.
So this was really nice to see.
I love that, and I appreciate that qualification around it, right? Because it takes two to tango, so to speak, right? And so that's an important qualification there. Now, a quick question Bianca, from an AFib perspective, I guess, how did you get involved in researching this? Is there a familial component to this, or was this just as you were going up through your own studies, you said, oh, AFib's such a large issue across the globe, let me dive into that, or is there something more intimate to that?
So how you mean like how we implement the knowledge from patients with AFib into the research?
No, I guess the question was, more of a personal question. Like when you decided to dive into studying AFib, did somebody in your family have it, and then you just say, oh wow, like this needs to be a platform I dive into because somebody was impacted by this disease?
Oh, not directly in the family, but it's more that if you read also on Reddit, but also at our AFib platform, the urgent needs from people with AFib, then it's just, it gives me a drive to think about solutions and also to implement the knowledge and also the needs of the people in the research. That is what driving me in this perspective. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And it sounds like there was, I guess, between this platform and what you're developing and the traditional methods, have there been any resistance at all to this new approach, or has it been it seems like it's been pretty well received?
The platform, no, there's no resistance. I think there's more attention for co-creation, citizen science, especially here in Europe, also in the Netherlands. This is the new, I think you can say it's like a new trend, upcoming trend. And patient involvement in research is getting more attention in every hospital in the Netherlands, also within Europe. So it becomes more important. The voice of the patient becomes more important. And research is now starting to think like, oh, how can I communicate with people with a certain condition? And luckily, we already have like 10 years of experience with communication with people and also collecting insights on a disease from patients. So it helps us a lot. So I think it's good to hear that that patient involvement gets more popular. Hopefully it's the same in the United States.
Yep. Yeah, we hope so too. We hope so too.
But
And I think
if
what
I
if
may, sorry.
no, please go ahead.
If I may add to that, I do actually think that there is still some friction though, because even though the patient's voice is more acknowledged, we still hear a lot of stories from people that are like, okay, but if I try to share my voice and, you know, share my experience with a cardiologist or share my data that I tracked, they sometimes are like, oh yeah, but that's not really a linked trigger. We don't know that from the literature. So we do notice that the system as a whole can still improve.
Yeah, it's in its infancy.
Exactly,
currently,
it's starting.
Right? It's starting the recognition that patients should also be involved in the research. It's we get more recognition via the government and also the European Commission. They find it's very important, the patient's voice, but it doesn't mean that in practice it's already up and running. There's still a lot to do to get the voice of the patient heard in the medical care system and also outside of the system.
That's great, and that's actually a perfect segue to my next question for you was, you know, let's define a little bit of what that citizen science model and what does that look like in practice. So can you briefly go through like what does that look like in your it starts in your mind of maybe a question to ask and then it goes from somewhere else. So if you mind just kind of walk us through those steps.
Yeah, we published an interesting overview of our concept of citizen science recently in the Frontiers Public Health.
Yep.
We collect the data from the forum and also what we hear from people with atrial fibrillation, but also from Reddit communities, Facebook, social media, so to speak. So we create questionnaires that we open online. People can fill out on these topics their experiences. For example, we have a questionnaires on stress, but also on COVID-19, the effect of COVID-19 vaccine on AFib, for example, but also exposure to pesticides. These are all ideas that we picked up by communicating and reading the messages from people with AFib. So we create questionnaires based on these topics. People can fill out their experiences on the topic. We collect these insights and we checked the medical literature, whether there are already publications on the topics, what is known on the topic, and are these topics usable in preclinical model systems. Okay. For example, in our lab we have preclinical model systems in terms of cultured atrial cardiomyocytes in a flask. We can mimic atrial fibrillation in these cultured atrial cardiomyocytes, and then we can study, for example, what is the role of pesticide exposure on the atrial cardiomyocytes. We also work with a Drosophila model system. Drosophila is a fruit fly, and we can mimic atrial fibrillation in Drosophila as well. So we can test pesticides or chemicals, but we can also test drugs in these model systems and see what is happening on the AFib outcome in these model systems. If we get good data, we also have next to that a biobank of atrial tissue samples donated by people who underwent an open heart surgery. During the surgery, the surgeon cuts off a little bit of atrial tissue. We receive the atrial tissue and we can do all kinds of experiments in the tissue. So we have cultured atrial cells, Drosophila, human tissue, and we have access to the clinical trial unit at Amsterdam UMC. So if we see a new druggable target, for example, we can test this target in the clinical setting. So from idea of the patients, we can bring this idea towards the bedside. Yeah. And that is basically how it works.
So it's so fascinating, and you know, I didn't get any further than just a general biology degree, but I can remember, and my mother always hated it, you know, because I didn't live on campus when I went to college, but I would come home and we'd have to do the Drosophila experiments, and she said, "Do you really have to put that into my refrigerator?" Right? And so I said, "Well, yes," and I look at that, and I think to myself, never at that point did I ever think that you could, and I didn't think I was going to ever have AFib either. but the fact that you're able to induce AFib in Drosophila is it's fascinating, right? All of this is just fascinating what you're doing. So kudos to you. Question on like what AFib or the AFib platform, how does that compare to a kind of a traditional patient registry or a support group? Is there like I mean, obviously the research side of it, but are there stark differences between both that we should know about?
Great question. I personally think that it depends a lot on the stakeholders that are contributing to a platform. Like if you, for example, just have a forum or a patient support group, you normally have like peers elaborating, on their experiences. Sometimes you would see a professional that would tune in as well. However, what I notice is that these insights, they kind of stay in the platform or in the forum. So I think what distinguishes the co-creation platform from these traditional platforms is that we kind of created like a research pipeline. So what Bianca mentioned is that we have a prioritization model where we actually look into the patterns on the platform, what are the most popular triggers, for example, and then we take it into like the research field, like what do we see here? Do we see also a mismatch in what is reported, for example? Should we dive further into that? Is there new hypotheses for more lab work or a clinical trial in the future? So I think that pipeline makes the distinguishment. And currently we're working on a new platform, an updated platform called AFib, because the AFIP Foundation was originally set up in the Netherlands, and I think this infrastructure is currently in a nice stage, but then it's all in Dutch. And we noticed that we could actually create a lot more impact when we take insights from people all over the world. So
that's awesome.
We are working on the structurization of this model that I mentioned with taking the insights from people and then prioritization, the metrics to implement it in there, so we can automatically build dashboards so that people are also aware of the patterns that they track themselves, but also what other community members are finding. So, and then for us, it's really interesting because we can take these insights into new research in an automated way, I would say, because now we do a lot of things manually still.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think, when you look at the separation of the groups, right, the researchers, physicians, and then the patients, right, this is a beautiful bridge that you have built, and it's so exciting to see the structure is there already, and you're expanding on top of that. And when you speak to the global side, I want to follow up a little bit on that with AFib. Currently, is there, because I know you're coming to Dallas this week to present at stopafib.org, is there any activity going? Are you connecting with Melanie to build that portion of the U.S. side of things out? Is that the relationship there?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
We actually have a lot of communication about the platform with Melanie, and we ask her, what are topics that are especially interesting within the US? What are people talking about? Like, for example, insurance could also be an interesting topic, right? And for the US citizens, that's different than for the people here that live in the Netherlands. So these are topics that we're discussing with Melanie. So what should be the content? But on the other hand, we also make sure that the platform is suitable for everyone and understandable. So that's another thing that I want to get from upcoming weekend. I want to talk to the people there. And when I present, I want to ask people to sign up to pre-register and try out the beta version with us, because people have so many different perspectives, and I think that's how Melanie's community is also truly helping us.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And to continue with you, Myrthe, right now too, I guess you've been studying obviously how patients do engage, in online health communities, and in my line of work and what we do on the lifestyle medicine side of things is, we find immediate, we'll say immediate adoption, but then they fall off, right? They lose interest. So what have you found that actually gets patients still to show up every single day and participate on a consistent basis?
That's a really, really great question from our community. So actually, in the first stages, I studied a lot like how does communication influence how people behave on our platform. And then I noticed that tuning in with people's emotion is very, very important. And especially in a positive way to also emphasize self-efficacy so that people actually have the feeling they can do something about what they fear the most, like, for example, stroke or heart failure. So that I published these results in also in NPJ Digital Medicine, how these factors influence behavior online through advertising, and then on the platform, how people sign up in their behavior. However, if I look into long-term engagement in our platform, I noticed that it's especially about providing value in each and every step. Like if you're sending a newsletter, we shouldn't just communicate like, here is what we do this summer. You really actually want to give something to the people that they can use in their daily lives, whether that is very valuable tips during the summertime. Let's say you give tips about hydration, but for us in our community, it's mostly providing them the voice to participate in a new survey, to participate in a design of a new study. And I think that is what keeps people showing up in our community, because they're always asking us, like, when is there something else I can participate in? I'm looking for a new survey. We really notice that people want to share their voice, but also not just share their voice, but actually know that something is being done with their insights. And I think making that very clear and showing up consistently makes people come back in our platform.
That's amazing. And I love that. And the fact that I think the words that you used a few years ago when we met was, using the language of love versus fear, right? Which I think is so great. And it's one of the things that, on our platform here with AFibulous Life and with my partners on the business side, when we do the lifestyle modification, we focus on, how to empower the patients to become their own center of excellence, right? Because it doesn't have to be you have a diagnosis and now you're set adrift, right? There's so much that we can do as individuals under ourselves to make our outcomes better, right? And we love that, and I love using the right language as well for that, because the psychology of the diagnosis is enough to kick you in the pants, right? And walking in fear is no way to take this disease on.
Absolutely. And actually, I just did an experiment. I'm currently working out the results with a newsletter that we send out to our community members, one with no emotion at all. So very factual, like, hey, we're currently setting up my AFib. This could be beneficial to you because of these reasons. Sign up now. And another email version where we have a way more warmer and emotional tone, in a positive way, because in my previous studies I found that emphasizing hope and in a loving way actually promotes behavior, the health behavior that we want to see. And I did an experiment beginning of July, and we see the exact same thing, like the email version that actually acknowledges that living with atrial fibrillation is tough, but there's something you could do about it. In this platform, you can manage your triggers. You can see what other community members are doing. So, hey, this can help you. And we're here for you. We hear you. That actually drives way more signups than the other version where you're just being factual. And I think that is also important for health professionals, because I sometimes get the feeling that they want to say the right things. They want to stay, for example, within science. They want to communicate the facts. But I think when you communicate with people, you really have to acknowledge the feeling that comes along with living with the condition. So I think that's really important.
Right, 100%. And you use the word triggers in there, so I want to build on that. So Bianca, right? So throughout your research, the patients have helped you kind of identify what those 5 leading triggers are for AFib. Can you walk us through what those are and how that finding has shaped your research agenda?
Yeah. So within the project we are working on called Circular, We we send out some questionnaires and ask people what are the most common triggers for your AFib. And the most common trigger is related to food or diet intake. The second trigger, what is also very common in people, is stress. Many people mentioned that if they experience a stressful event, that may help to trigger their AFib. And this is also not often recognized by cardiologists. A third trigger is, for example, allergies. We also found a very interesting patient who mentioned, like, I have underlying allergies, and when I took an desloratadine to suppress my allergy, my AFib has been totally suppressed. So that is a very interesting observation and also very novel. That is also an observation that we are currently investigating in the lab. Another trigger, which is unforeseen, I would say, is that people mention that during my profession, I was exposed to pesticides, and I believe that this exposure resulted in AFib in my case. So that is an unforeseen trigger, super interesting, because exposures to pesticides is these days very common to all of us. So we have also a research line on the role of pesticides in AFib. But on the other side, there are also two suppressors of AFib mentioned that we are investigating within Project Circular. And one of the suppressors is, some people mention, like, I changed my diet towards a more whole food plant-based diet, and that helped me enormously to suppress my AFib episodes and also to improve my quality of life. And another suppressor of AFib is music. So some people mention, like, I listen to certain music and that calms me down, and that also helps to suppress my AFib. So within Circular, we are investigating basically these triggers / suppressors of AFib.
That's great, and I want to build upon a little bit around the food side of things, because I know we've chatted about the plant-based diets and how important that is, and I guess that just a quick connection for that is because kind of leading towards that plant-based diets, we're seeing a little bit less inflammation in the body. So is that the correlation that people are coming about to say, is like maybe this is having a less inflammatory impact on the cardiac tissue?
That's a very relevant question. We wrote a review paper on what is known from the literature related to whole food plant-based diet and AFib. And so far, several plant-based diet studies have been conducted, but never in relationship with AFib, but in relationship with weight loss, hypertension. It has a beneficial effect on the suppression of hypertension, diabetes, but also inflammation levels drop when you switch your diet towards a more plant-based diet. And also I think quality of sleep improves, and interestingly, all these markers are risk factors for the development of AFib. So our idea is, if you suppress all these comorbidities for arrhythmia, including AFib, it potentially whole food plant-based diet may be a very important way to suppress your AFib. And at the Netherlands, we are currently writing a protocol now to investigate the role of a whole food plant-based on AFib patients, to get the first proof whether this a change in diet may help to suppress AFib and improve the quality of life.
Okay, that's amazing. And I want to throw out a plug here too. So on our side, and I don't know if we've ever had this conversation, so our organization is fully connected, endorsed by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I don't know, are you familiar with the ACLM in the United States?
No,
I'm not.
Yeah. So it's actually the fastest growing body of healthcare in the United States right now, and it's all around the plant-based diet and eliminating stress and risky behaviors and all those things. And so that's actually the platform in which we use when we engage with all of our patients. So maybe there's something, I'll throw it out there as, because I feel as you get it out into the universe and from my lips to God's ears, right? Maybe there's something that we could do in connection with the ACLM here in the United States too, because I would love to see that. And in fact, the current president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine is Dr. Padmaja Patel, and she just happens to be our chief medical officer as well. So there's huge desires to get to understand and really transform the medical community in this way. So let's continue those conversations. But that's amazing to hear. And I'm going to throw out something real quick, and this is not in the script, but the whole concept around GLP-1s and the impact on AFib. I mean, it's actually really fascinating, like what GLP-1s are doing, and I'm sure we could probably talk for hours about this. But where do you see that going with the treatment of AFib?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that some patients with AFib will benefit from the GLP-1 inhibitors or agonists. Is this the way to go, or because when you stop taking these drugs, I guess AFib will recur again? Personally, I feel more for lifestyle changes instead of taking compounds that can have multiple effects on your body, which are originally or in the early stage beneficial. What will be the outcomes on the long term? We don't know exactly.
I think so too. But if you look at the emerging evidence, it all looks very positive. Like you see that it's lowering inflammation in the body. Losing body fat is already so beneficial as well to reduce atrial fibrillation. So I do think for people that it might be. I'm totally not the expert on this, by the way. So, but I do see why people would get started. But I really, what I also notice is that it can dehydrate people when I look into the literature, and I found that that's also interesting. And as we see this as well for people that mention that they go onto a keto diet, that actually it sometimes may trigger atrial fibrillation because of the reduction in electrolyte balance in the body. So in the end, I do think that you have to investigate what the perfect balance is here and what the safety is in the long term.
Yeah, no, I love this part of the conversation because I've been saying it's not a heart condition, right? It's a life condition, and when we think about the lifestyle changes that we can make, it's amazing, right? And I was speaking with a do you know Dr. Emily Benjamin? Maybe you'll see her at
Yes,
so I had a conversation with her last week, right? And she and I chatted briefly, and she's like, work on prevention. How do you do that, right? And so that's certainly something that we want to strive for, because we would love to convert everybody to lifestyle, right? And just everybody but people need vehicles to get there, right? And so I think what you're doing and what we're trying to do, that's the vehicle, because people can't do this alone, and they shouldn't do it alone. They should do it within the community. But I love what you're talking about, and it sounds like what AFIP was built for was to finally listen to patients out there and bring that to life, which is amazing. So that's great. So Myrthe, back to you. What do patients most commonly say they wish their cardiologist would understand? And what's the gap between that clinical conversation and the lived experience? And is it getting better, and is it only getting better just because of what you folks are doing?
I really like that question, because this is indeed something that I discuss with people when I see them, and I think they would wish that cardiologists could look into everything else that is happening in the body as well. And I know that is really hard, because a cardiologist is not trained to recognize all of the symptoms in someone. But I oftentimes, when I see people, at least they mention oh, I actually didn't know that, my thyroid condition may influence my atrial fibrillation. And or when I discuss, this condition with my cardiologist, they don't really know what to do about it. So I have the feeling that people are really longing for this more holistic approach into treating their atrial fibrillation, because it might be a symptom of something else that is happening, right? So, and I think that holistic approach, that is something that they're currently calling for the most.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's great. And Bianca, switching back to you, and I know you've dabbled and shared a few concepts around the circular consortium. I guess is there a statement that you can make to say like why this matters to people living with AFib today? Like what's the whole kind of the
Yeah.
point to grab onto around that circular consortium?
So far, AFib is still considered as an one-size-fits-all condition. So everybody gets the same treatment, basically.
Yeah.
If you have paroxysmal, probably you will get advice to go for a catheter ablation. Everybody gets more or less the same kind of drugs that originate from the 1960s. So there's not a lot of innovation in the treatment of AFib. But if you look to this whole pool of patients with AFib, we're starting to recognize that for these people you have multiple subgroups. For example, you have people who have potentially autonomous nervous system imbalance, more stress-related AFib.
Yeah.
We recognize some people have allergies that may drive AFib. Other people have, maybe conditions like a sleep apnea or certain comorbidities and lifestyle-related AFib induction. Some people are sport-related AFib. We know that endurance sport can also trigger AFib. So instead of treating all these patients in the same way, maybe we should consider what is the trigger in a specific person that drives AFib, and act upon that trigger besides the normal clinical treatment you get. But you also need to treat the trigger or the substrate or the lifestyle that drives the AFib in that specific patient. And in the Netherlands, recently there was a study published in the European journal, Heart Journal, of the group of Vermeer and Lucas Dekkers, and they showed that if you have built a team, this holistic approach of a dietitian, a physiotherapist, a lifestyle coach, etc., around the patient, the recurrence of AFib after ablation is dramatically reduced, because you not only treat the AFib directly, but you also treat the substrate or the condition of the person that drives AFib. So I think that is the way we have to go to. And also your organization is working on this holistic AFib treatment. Yeah. So I think this will be beneficial for a lot of people in the future.
I think so too, and it's funny. Literally in 2 hours, I'm having a conversation with industry about that very similar approach to doing that, to wrapping it around, right? Because it's when you look at the AFib guidelines and everything that it states, right? It says the second pillar in the management of AFib is lifestyle modification, which people in the United States don't do such a great job with. And so we're happy to be that second pillar and help folks do that as well. And I think what's important around the word triggers that keeps coming up too is it helps people to realize that what their individual trigger is actually being noted, and I think that's what you're doing, which is great, because it doesn't make it seem like you're out on your own and it's just something to deal with, right? It's really not a thing. It's just something that's secondary. And I think that takes into consideration the whole person again. Like your lived experience is your lived experience, and it might be different than everybody else down the road, but that's okay. You're not alone, because there's going to be somebody that's going to have that same thing. And I think understanding that their life, if you're changing your life around this condition, you need to know that what your experience is real. And I think that was one of the challenges that I had when I was a patient. Was here I was when I newly diagnosed. I was 38 years old. I'm 52 now, right? So when I'm 38, and I was a rower in college, right? Which was interesting, by the way. I was at HRS in Chicago, and I just happened to go into one of the sessions where all the physicians from Australia were there. And so they found out that I was a rower, and they're like, oh my gosh, so you're 6'6", and you're a rower, and your atrium's huge, and all these other things, right? So they were just throwing out all these things to me. And I'm like, yeah, but I thought that was a good thing, right? And they're like, it is a good thing, but you're predisposed to this because you're a big guy, right? So it was kind of funny being in the same room with those folks. But so Bianca, I want to stick with you a little bit too. I want to dive in a little bit around GGA and the geniality trial. Can you talk a little bit about that and where does that research stand and where are we going?
Yeah, yeah, nice that you bring this up. GGA, I started to research heat shock proteins already 25 years ago. And back then, I used to work in the Montreal Heart Institute in the team of Dr. Stanley Natel. And I proposed this idea to test in the dog model for AFib this compound GGA. And he was willing to test this compound in the dog model. And we, to their surprise, not my surprise, but to their surprise, GGA prevented AFib. And so till then, everybody focused on ion channel blockers. So what are heat shock proteins and how can they prevent AFib? It was totally new topic, a new approach in understanding of AFib. So it almost fully prevented AFib induction in the dog.
Wow.
And GGA is a compound, it's already on the market since the early 80s in Japan and Asian countries. So I thought like, hey, this is a quick step to a clinical trial. And then nothing happens because this compound is off-label, there's no patent, there's no interest from pharmaceutical industry to put money in such an old compound. Nothing happens. But recent, and also this compound was never registered in Europe. So to set up a clinical trial in Europe with such an old compound registered in Japan but not in the Netherlands was so difficult and very costly. And of course, there's no money to conduct such a clinical trial. So not a lot happened for a period of time, but a couple of years ago, the EMA, the European Medical Agency, changed the rules and made it more flexible to introduce compounds that are never been registered in Europe to use those compounds for a clinical trial. And so a couple of years ago, we got the opportunity to synthesize GGA in Europe, make it ready for a clinical trial. So under GMP, it was synthesized. And we are currently running the first clinical trial with GGA and with the primary end point to study whether GGA can prevent atrial fibrillation onset in patients undergoing cardiac surgery. We know that if people undergo an open heart surgery, up to 50% of the people develop atrial fibrillation 2 to 3 days after cardiac surgery. So the clinical trial is such that we pre-treat for 5 days patients with GGA before they undergo cardiac surgery, and then we monitor continuously after cardiac surgery whether the person developed AFib, yes or no. And we are at the end phase of this clinical trial. The trial is called Geniality, and in September we will complete the clinical trial, and it's double-blind placebo-controlled, and then we will unblind all the data, and then we will see whether GGA indeed can protect against AFib.
That's
case
fascinating.
it protects against AFib, then we will set up a second clinical trial and see whether GGA can also help to recover from AFib. We have very strong evidence from our preclinical lab in cultured atrial cardiomyocytes that if you give AFib in cells in the lab and then you post-treat the cells with GGA, you see an improvement of the synthesis of new proteins in the cardiomyocytes. So it helps to recover the cardiomyocytes from this period of AFib. So in the lab, we know that the compounds can help to recover from AFib, and then the next step will be to test whether this compound can also help people to recover from AFib.
Wow, that's fascinating. And have there been some patients from your AFib platform actually in the trial itself?
I'm not sure because the inclusion of the patients are people undergoing cardiac surgery.
Okay.
So they should not have AFib in this clinical trial. So it should be new onset of AFib after cardiac surgery.
But we do know that there were people that were traveling to Japan
Yeah.
to get
To get
GGA.
it.
Yeah, last year
Amazing.
I had a conference in Japan, and the first thing what I did when I came in Japan, I went into a drugstore and see myself whether I can buy GGA in a drugstore, and it's you can simply buy it everywhere.
Just simply buy it.
Yeah.
And GGA is an easy thing to pronounce. And I'm imagining there's some long chemical name to it. What is the actual full name to GGA?
Geranyl acetone.
Okay. Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
congratulations. And how many patients ultimately were in this trial?
84.
Okay, 84. And then so if once everything's revealed, it looks good, then does it kind of go to the now a larger trial? So then you'd get up to a couple hundred patients and start to
Yeah.
increase the N value. Okay.
Yeah, and beside that, we are also developing new molecules based on GGA with some improved physicochemical structures. Because
Okay.
GGA it's a very now I become maybe a bit technical. It's a hydrophobic molecule, so you need a relatively high dose to get it into the cell.
Yeah.
And we are now making some modification to the molecule to make it better absorb, to become better absorbed by the cardiomyocytes, so we
Okay.
can work with a lower dose.
Yeah. Yeah. That hydrophobic obviously meaning not liking each other. I remember that, and hydrophilic meaning loving each other. That's how I learned that in
Yeah.
biology class. But that's great. That's amazing. I'm so excited to see what that data is all about. And so September it will be revealed, and you're going to do a big press release and everything else, hopefully, right? And that's great.
Yeah, especially when the data is good. Yeah, and
Oh
we see
yeah,
a
well,
nice benefit cost. But yeah, I'm very exciting, because we started this whole research line on heat shock proteins in the early zeros, and now
yeah,
in 2026, so 25 years later,
25 years.
we have this clinical trial. So it's not like, okay, we discovered something in the lab, let's go for a clinical trial. It's something that takes a lot of time and effort.
It
And
does.
what I also really love about GGA is that it's actually one of the reasons why the AFIP Foundation was founded, because of that frustration. Like, it takes so long, to get this study done, and it costs a lot of money to run it.
It does.
And people within our foundation, they were donating to make this study happen. But also Melanie's people at stopafib.org, their community members, they also donated.
Yeah.
So it's just so nice to see how other people living with AFib also see the value of this study, and they
Yeah.
want to see the results. And when people donate, you can actually make these studies happen instead of industry donating.
Yeah, this is a very important remark indeed, that it's partly patient-funded clinical trial.
Yeah.
And that's unique.
I think so
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
And I appreciate you saying that, because it's as if you guys knew all my questions, right? And that was going to be my next question, was because the patients are funding these things, right? So then everybody's involved, everybody's interested, right? They have a stake in the game, and we're all in this together, right? I mean, it's like it's a university, it's a fraternity, a sorority, or whatever you want to call it, but it's like we're all brothers and sisters in this, and so let's join arms, fight together, and see what kind of good things we can do, which is
I love
amazing.
that.
I'm so excited to hear this data coming out here shortly. So kind of, because I know that we're kind of running out of time here a little bit. I could talk to you for hours, by the way, and I'm so disappointed I'm not going to see you this week, but we have to get together live and in person. But if there is
I agree.
something, and if there is something that you can share to an AFib patient right now about, because my whole platform is the AFibulous Life, right? And it was just funny because this came out of actually listening to Melanie's presentations last year from that conference. There was a physician that was up there, and he was talking about, quality of life for patients, and how 5 years ago the AFib patient was screaming and yelling, "Get me 20, get me 25 years," all of that. And then he says, you know what, that's changed now. It's, give me 10 good quality years. Like, I don't care if I have 20 horrible years as an AFib patient. Give me 10 quality, and then I'm good. And so then I sat back and I thought to myself, patients are looking for an AFibulous life, right? Like they want to be able to know, like, hey, this diagnosis does not define me, and I can do something greater with it internally on my own, because there's the key thing that we talk about, and the gap we try to fill in care is between each of those appointments, right? Where people feel alone. Like, how do we fill that in? But I guess if from your minds, what is one thing that you could say to somebody today that, like, how can you help them create their own AFibulous life?
I think it's a really, really interesting question, because I think it differs from person to person, of course, but I do think that a way to start is to start tracking what is happening to you. Because I think that will give you more answers in the end than what you may think of now. So start tracking your triggers, your symptoms. What treatments did you take? Also, maybe for other types of symptoms or conditions. What were your treatments? But also, what was it that you did during your day? So what kind of lifestyle are you having now, and how can you maybe improve that? So to start tracking, and then to discover whether there are certain markers that you can optimize. So if, for example, you notice that every time you get an episode, 2 weeks before that you had a couple of nights of terrible sleep, then maybe you can start to work on that. So, and I think change goes step by step. So also to not try to change everything at once, but to just, work off your list of what you think are your triggers based on what you tracked. And I do think that the first step is to start logging how you experience AFib. And soon I hope we can provide that platform where people can start logging and start sharing these experiences also with others through My AFib. But I think that is number one. And then you can hopefully also create your customized plan, because like I said, everyone is different. Maybe someone will benefit from a whole food plant-based diet, but maybe the other person may benefit more from a Mediterranean diet, because there's more fish and fats from olive oil involved, for example. Maybe the one can benefit from some exercise, while someone else may benefit from improved sleep, or both. So that's, I think, my take on it.
Yeah, and then I can extend on this, because if we collect all these precious data of people with AFib, we can see whether we can find patterns, and we can potentially investigate some of these patterns in the lab, and also can come up with new trials to test in patients and see whether we can find some evidence for certain groups of patients with a certain treatment. These subgroups may benefit from a different kind of treatment that is provided currently in the health care.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Well, that's great. I appreciate your comments there. And as we begin to wrap up here, first and foremost, thank you for your friendship that we've been able to establish, separated by an ocean, but I still feel very close to what you folks are working on, and what you've built with AFib is definitely the proof that patients are not just passengers in the research, right? They can be a part of this, and they can help govern the direction of their lives. And being that they're collaborators, co-authors, contributors, all of that stuff is so important, because when we think about establishing your own center of excellence, that's what you have to be. You have to be an active participant. If you sit back and wait for things to change, it's not going to change. And I think this is why it's so important what you're doing, and so I'm grateful for that. And so to our listeners today, if today's conversation lit something in you, visit afiponline.org. Is there any other sites or places they should visit outside of afiponline.org?
If people want to participate in the development of My AFib, like the tracker and the community dashboards, that they can pre-register at myafib.co. Okay,
that's great. Well, thank you for that. And if you want to go deeper, on building your own whole heart recovery, come find us at Unlimited Heart and Nudge Health, as well as AFibulous Life. So until next time, continue to live fully, lead boldly, and never stop writing your own story, because your heart has more to say. Keep listening. This is the AFibulous Life. Have a good afternoon, and we'll talk to you guys soon.